How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to Agave and Cactus Talk. Today I wanted to make a podcast about one of my favorite cactus that I'm growing here on the farm. And this is Opuntia Phaeacantha, which is also known as desert prickly pear, Mojave desert prickly pear, the tulip prickly pear. It's got a few nicknames, but that's why I always mention the Latin name is the most important, because across all these areas the Latin name will be the same, but the nickname may vary, right? So why would they nickname Opuntia Phaeacantha the Mojave desert prickly pear? Well, it's native right here to the Mojave desert, and particularly to the western Mojave desert, the tip of it right here in Bakersfield area. So kind of like where I am at, the western Mojave desert's a little bit different from the eastern part of it. What most people recognize is, like, say, Joshua Tree and on, right? You in this western area see lots of creosote, scrubland, and a few Joshua trees, but and I mean, there's some areas that are Joshua tree forest, but very few in this area in the western Mojave, because we only get 2 to 3 inches average a year of rain. Whereas the eastern portion of the Mojave desert can be, 6, even up to 8, 9 inches of rain, depending where they're at, right? So that's why you start to see trees, and you start to see more Joshua trees, and that kind of sounds redundant, but it's because Joshua trees actually aren't fucking trees; they're yucca. So they're they're in the asparagus or the agave family. They're not trees, anyways. But so you start to see more life, you can say, in plant biodiversity as you go east in the Mojave, because there's a little bit more rain. And I mentioned that separation between the west and east Mojave desert because if you're looking for extremely hardy plants to cultivate or to grow in your garden that are going to be extremely drought tolerant, the western Mojave desert has particularly better species suited for those conditions, right? So western Mojave desert, I've explained a lot right here. We get 1 to 3 times a week winds that are anywhere from 20 all the way up to 50, 60 miles an hour, with some gusts sometimes reaching hurricane level stuff, 65 to 75. And that's why you really got to nail down your roofs here. And on those days, people's roofs go flying because we got a lot of wind. And this wind dries out the plants like crazy, and it makes it a really tough climate. I tell a lot of the people that the cold is a whole thing in the desert. The heat is a whole thing in the desert. But the wind may be the most crucial factor, right? Because the wind dries the plants out so much during these large windstorms, and it can be worse than, or it can have a more detrimental effect on the cactus or agave versus the cold or the heat, right? So the heat may, sunburn the plant. It may dry the plant out. Sometimes it can kill it, right? But just assuming everything but death here, that plant can still come back, right? Like a lot of times. If it's too cold, a lot of the times they'll get frost or snow and they'll come back. That one is a little bit tougher than the heat, but the wind is the worst of them, because this is something that's constant throughout the whole year. So unlike the heat and the cold, which may only come, we may have some days that are 118 Fahrenheit here, right, in the summer, but it's, a small segment of days, and the frost and snow days are handful, right? You can count them on one hand, which means that, you know, they're not throughout the whole year consistently, whereas the wind every single day is, you know, battering down your plants, stripping the moisture, eroding a lot of your soil if you're not careful, and making it tough to cultivate certain plants, right? So I mentioned that wind being a huge factor because it's something that not a lot of people really mention. But yeah, going to this point that the Western Mojave Desert plants are extremely, extremely hardy plants. And Opuntia Phaeacantha, right, going back to the point here, is in this region, which always stuck out to me as a, you know, plant that I may want to cultivate. So before I ever got into cactus farming, I already had eaten tons of different cacti, pads, fruit, and flowers that I grew in my garden in Altadena. And my dad, he was, you know, someone that loves agave and cactus just like me, or is someone that loves cactus and agave just like me. So from the time I was young, I was cultivating these plants, you know, even made my first hybrid before I was an adult. It's interesting. But, you know, the plants always interested me a lot. That's why I started my own gardening business once I got out of college. But, you know, these Opuntia, so by the time I, you know, bought some land and I was out of college, I immediately was like, well, I want to grow what I love to eat, right? So I loved eating agave and cactus. I loved making, you know, at that point, it was funny because I couldn't buy alcohol, but I could make my own spirits, or I could make my own pulque from the stuff that was in my garden, on the low key, right, obviously. And this, you know, started my fascination with utilization of these plants, right? So by the time I start my gardening business, I'm already in my head like, man, I need to buy tons of cacti so I could start farming them. And I had began propagation in my garden of tons of different species that I had. And I think I even talk about this in a different podcast where a lot of those species I planted here, and they immediately got eaten by a jackrabbit because I had no fence. So, you know, years of work of propagation to just a few days get murked, which is why I tell you guys, you really got to plan your farms out wisely. But anyways, I was like, man, how the heck can I get a bunch of cactus for cheap, right? Because these fucking cactus were getting eaten. I couldn't propagate them, and I didn't want to spend tens of thousands buying them, right? So I came upon this idea of recycling the plants that I was throwing away, right? So in landscaping, right, people pay you to go do demolition. They take out a garden so you could put in a new garden, right? This may happen when somebody buys a home or wants to retrofit a home, whatever, right? And a lot of these plants we take to the landfill, obviously. So I've explained multiple times before in the podcast how instead of doing that, what I started doing is saying, okay, I'm going to save myself the landfill costs, make the landfill last longer for the county, and save, you know, putting all this green waste into a landfill when it can actually be recycled instead of, you know, contributing to the landfill. Because a lot of people don't know these landfills are not forever, right? So, you know, they have finite timelines, and many of these landfills are going to close down as soon as they fill up, right? So I'll give an example. The landfill that I went to was Skull Canyon over there. I think it's in Eagle Rock, if I'm not mistaken, but it's literally right by Eagle Rock, like the rock that they named the city after. And if I remember correctly, Skull Canyon should be closing around like 2045 or 2050 or something, and they're gonna build like a giant park. And I mean, this is not unprecedented. Look at South Coast Botanical Garden, this amazing 60-acre garden that LA County and the nonprofit foundation of the garden there run. And this place was built on top of a landfill and a mine, right? So it was a mine, finished mining everything, then they landfilled it because there was a giant hole. Then when they filled the hole, they were like, fuck it, let's make it a botanical garden. So this has been done in LA lots of times. And actually another landfill in the San Gabriel Valley, I forget the name, but it's more east of Pasadena. I don't remember if it's in Monrovia or Arcadia, but it's a little bit east of Pasadena. There's going to be another one that's going to be turned into a gigantic park in the San Gabriel Valley pretty soon once they fill it up and close the landfill. So anyways, going back to this point of the landfill has finite timelines. I studied environmental science, and I was like, okay, I would like for this landfill to be available not for half my lifetime, but for, hopefully the whole lifetime. And if I put less into it, that means it'll last longer. So, and then obviously the recycling factor, right? So I said, okay, I'll take the green waste to my farm, even if it's not stuff I can plant. The goats will eat it. I could turn it into mulch. I can turn it into compost, right? It's turning into something beneficial. And then all of this stuff is going into the actual farm, right? So this is great. And, I was saving my company money. I was recycling stuff and then not buying anything for the farm as far as amendments, because I was making it all, right? And then with the cactus, right, I was recycling tons and tons of cactus and trying lots of different species out here, seeing what hit, seeing what didn't hit. And, I came across the initial Opuntia Phaeacantha, funny enough, over there in the LA region, somewhere that was not desertic, right? And a lot of that initial Opuntia Phaeacantha came from this Castaic region, right? So I did a garden demo, took out a bunch of it, and then I started realizing what it was, how to identify it, why I really liked it. And around here in the Antelope Valley, the desert region of LA County, when I started doing projects, I started, identifying it on tons and tons of properties. So the initial one, I found it over there, in the more forest portion of the county. But then, once I knew what it was, I started directly knocking on doors wherever I saw it, like, overgrown in the area, and just asking people, like, hey, can I cut it back? Like, is it a nuisance? Like, do you need help with anything? And then I could take that cactus as payment, Well, this basically got me an efficient way to get thousands of pads through recycling from the landscaping jobs, right? So, pretty much, I'd say 90% of the cactus that I have here initially started from recycled pads, right? That were stuff that we had to toss away if we were a normal landscaping company, but because we had the farm, we could plant it all, right? And this Opuntia Phaeacantha, the more I researched it and grew it, the more I knew it was going to be a plant that could potentially, how do I explain it? It's like this plant is not only an amazing plant for California cactus farming, but it's one of the few cactus that could probably go throughout 30 of the 50 or more even states of the United States here. And this is a cactus that, can solve the issue of the cold, right? So cactus farming will be limited to the coast, the south, and the eastern coast, and the west coast because of cold hardiness. So, anywhere mostly where it's getting frost or snow, most of these cactus can't be cultivated there and will die, right? So I've always thought, well, cactus farming, I wish it could happen in America, but everyone's trying to plant Opuntia ficus indica, which will die anywhere where there's frost or snow, right? And I started seeing, okay, well, maybe this Opuntia Phaeacantha could be something that I begin to move around the USA, and begins the cactus industry, right? And it slowly started to become that, So Opuntia Phaeacantha, now I've shipped it to, I think, 22 states, and Puerto Rico, Guam, probably another 10 territories, and it's excelled everywhere that it's gone. Places that are hot, the desert, the forest, the open grasslands, the scrublands, like coastal, obviously. Every region it's been at, it's proliferated. It's amazing to see that. And I kind of got the glimpse of that because I was doing gardening, and in LA County we have so many different microclimates. So I took it up to Pearl Blossom, where sometimes you get 2 feet of snow. Boom, living, doing amazing, right? Producing fruit and pads. I took it here to the deserts, right, where you got 118, a bunch of wind, frost, and a little snow. Did amazing. I took it to the coast. It didn't die from too much water, which happens with a lot of these cold-hardy, desertic cactus. They can't take too much water. So Opuntia Phaeacantha, I realized, could be a species that could be, if it could be dry farmed here in the Mojave on 2 inches of rain, then it could, this concept that I was doing could be expanded to the rest of the United States. And it was the first cactus that I had the ability to do this with. I'll give an example. One of my strongest cactus, the Opuntia littoralis, has only been tested down to 14 or down to 10 Fahrenheit, really. I say 14 because that's the temperature I've tested it at, but we've sent it to farms where they hit 10 and they're proliferating for them. But still, this allowed me a few more states, say potentially with littoralis, but definitely not half or more of the country, which is what I was looking for, so that this industry could begin to develop, right, with a USA native variety, obviously, right? So this is one thing I always tell the Mexicans in agave and cactus, very afraid of the United States taking over their industries, and I'm like, they're gonna have to be completely different, man, because look, even with agave, right, like agave tequiliana, agave angustifolia, that are the main ones going, well, as I mentioned, they're all agave angustifolias. You got agave angustifolia, subspecies tequiliana, cultivar Blue Weber, right? That one is what makes tequila. Then you got angustifolia, subspecies espadín. That one makes mezcal. Then you've got different angustifolias that make bacanora, right? Like a lot of these angustifolias, you could say, are 99.9% of production of agave spirits in Mexico. And every single one of those species of angustifolia cannot drop under 25 Fahrenheit. Tequiliana can drop to 27, then it starts to go to shit. Espadín could drop to 25 to 27, and it goes to shit. I've bred a little bit out of that, by recycling different species and seeding them or doing different stuff, and drop that down to 20, which is still weak. Can't get it off the coast much because everywhere gets under 20, man. As soon as you leave 100 miles from any coastline, whether it's the west, the south, the east, it gets cold as fuck. So, not able to be grown, these agaves, in the United States, right? So while California's coastal and Central Valley farmers may proliferate in farming the crop, this shit is not going all over the USA. A USA agave industry would have to be from like agave americana, agave chrysantha, agave havardiana, agave fucking, decipiens, like all of these species that are native to the United States, that are cold hardy, that are heat hardy, that are wind hardy, drought tolerant. That's the shit that's going to expand all over the U.S. But the same thing comes in with cactus. So Opuntia Phaeacantha, majority of it, and its cultivars can't drop under 25. I found over 12 years of farming recycling and cultivating Opuntia ficus indica, I've found a total of 4 cultivars that are more cold hardy than 20. Most of 15, still very weak. You know, what I'm trying to explain to you here is that the cactus, right, the Opuntia ficus indica, which is kind of like the angustifolias in agave, that make up 99% plus of the Opuntia that is farmed in Mexico, it's not going to be the species that proliferates throughout the United States. So have no worries, Mexicans. They're not going to jack your stuff here. California is another story because it's one of the biggest ag states and it's on the coast, which means that a lot of California could potentially become a direct competitor to Mexican agave and Mexican Opuntia if they grow Opuntia ficus indica and agave angustifolias, which unfortunately they are. And I've mentioned to countless of my Mexican agave spirit brand homies that you know, that sometimes they're hating on each other in Mexico, like, oh, fuck you additive brands and fuck you non-additive brands, and you know, the real threat is not each other there. The real threat's the gringos, in my opinion. And I say that as a person that holds both U.S. and Mexican citizenship, right? It's not to say I favor one or the other, but as a businessman, it would be wise to not ignore the Americans stepping on your turf, because yeah, America does stuff, you know, big ag a certain way, and they're gonna try to make the cheapest bullshit possible. If you think the large brands that are foreign owned making additive, we'll say agave spirits, right, is the bad thing in Mexico, wait until you see what us Americans make. We're gonna fucking make that stuff look like it's fucking gold. And you see it already, right? Some of the largest agave farmers in California are traditional big ag. I mean, you know, it doesn't get bigger than thousands and thousands of acres of almonds, right? And if these farmers are looking at agave, yeah, I'd be worried if I owned an agave brand in Mexico. You know, most of the agave I've explained in the podcast in Mexico, we utilize that agave for our family ourselves, so we don't really give a fuck about what the market happens, right? But if you are someone that directly sells to the spirit companies, or if you're a big spirit maker in Mexico, shit, man, you know, you better start planning for the competition. And yeah, you know, I am trying to do something different with agave in America, but unfortunately, I'm not the biggest voice. So it's kind of why we started the podcast, so that people try to do shit right and not try to copy the fuck out of Mexican agave or cactus and try to jack that industry from Mexico. If we do something, it needs to be our own species, mainly, and it needs to be something different, right? Agave has 1,000 uses. The fact that everyone wants to make fucking alcohol, which, by the way, the newer generations are drinking 90% less of, is a stupid-ass business move. You know, it's like today I read that the federal government's bailing out the peach growers over there in Solano County. Sounds great on paper because Del Monte went bankrupt. What business is wise to only sell to one buyer? And to subsidize that with our taxpayer dollars is pretty idiotic in my point. It's just corporate welfare for people that, you know, when they were selling it all to Del Monte Foods and making bank, nobody was complaining. You get me? They have one fucking bad year where these guys go bankrupt, and, you know, they're all out of fucking solutions. You're telling me fucking thousands of farmers that grow, or not thousands, but hundreds of farmers that grow peaches couldn't come together and form a cooperative and fucking purchase Del Monte through bankruptcy, which the bank, by the way, would have gave to them on the fucking cheap because they're the only people that could manage it. And it comes to us as taxpayers to save these people is ridiculous. But that's the type of stuff you see in America, you know. we're probably going to be trying to subsidize pretty poor agricultural practices in agave and cactus. But anyways, man, I've been going on them sidetracks. Going back to the point that Opuntia Phaeacantha gave an opportunity to USA agave to be something different. And that really excited me, because I said, now I should tell you the temperature controls for this agave, or the cactus, I guess. Opuntia Phaeacantha can take down to negative 20 Fahrenheit. In some areas, it has taken down to negative 25 when it has been seeded, which means I sold the seed to someone in a cold-ass state. They fucking grew the seeds and put them outside, and they fucking lived through the snow. Obviously not as baby seedlings. They probably grew them indoors for a year. But point is, this Opuntia Phaeacantha, the most cold-hardy cacti in the USA, is a cactus that could get to negative 30 Fahrenheit, which, what is the name of it? I forget. Well, I guess it'd be Fragilis or Humifusa. So Humifusa I know is for sure negative 20, like Opuntia Phaeacantha. That's the East Coast prickly pear. But then the most northern prickly pear, Fragilis, I think that's the negative 31, if I'm not mistaken. I don't remember. But the point is, Opuntia Phaeacantha is within just a few clicks of that. You get me temperature-wise. But the key difference there is that it's an extremely fast-growing Opuntia versus a lot of these, like the Humifusa and the Fragilis, right? So the Fragilis, I know particularly, does not like to be overwatered, right? And Humifusa is a little different. It could definitely take a lot of water without stunting its growth, and it'll actually just accelerate it. So Humifusa would be the most cold hardy that could take some extra water. Now, why is that important? Because Opuntia Phaeacantha, in areas where it's not cold, like California, Texas, Oklahoma, some areas, right? These areas where traditionally, say they don't drop before or under 30 or 40 Fahrenheit, they could potentially irrigate their Opuntia Phaeacantha a little bit more. Or say, for instance, I'm off 2-3 inches of rain here, getting a certain production that I'm content with of pads and fruit. Well, particularly, say if they were planted on the eastern coast, or northern California, where some of their rains might start reaching from 20 to 40 inches of rain, you could still obviously dry farm them, but the production may be literally 10 times greater, right? So that's something you're not going to get out of Humifusa on the west coast and the central portion of the country, because it's not heat hardy, or it can't take these 118 Fahrenheit summers, days, a week of that, 2 weeks of that, without having significant loss. Whereas Phaeacantha, I got a field of Phaeacantha I stopped irrigating like 4 years ago, dude. I haven't even touched it, and it's been through all of those extreme summers, winters, right? To just show you, okay, East Coast, Central, West, North, South of the country, Opuntia Phaeacantha can excel, So whether you're dry farming it on low water, never irrigating, or whether you're in the desert, maybe irrigating a little bit with some rainwater you capture, which I still count as dry farming, or maybe you're in an area that it rains a lot, or it's hot area, or windy area, or cold area, or really elevated area, Opuntia Phaeacantha is going to make it. So it was the first one that I started to see, okay, this shit could go everywhere, man. And not only can it take negative 20, it could take all the way up to 121 Fahrenheit without significant damage. And it won't yellow, it won't dry up, it won't shrivel, it won't go to crap. And I'm talking about established plants here, right? So plants that already have developed their root systems at least a year or two, right? Young plants may need to be established. That's not usually a huge issue if you're planting in the rainy season, as we've described before, right? So if you could plant at the beginning of your rainy season, by the end of that rainy season, usually they should be established enough to be growing. And like I said, Opuntia Phaeacantha is a very fast grower. So off of one pad that is, say, a 5-inch pad, 3-4 inches wide, this pad within 2 to 3 years can develop into a 4-foot by 4-foot plant. Now, the maximum dimensions may be 6 foot tall and 6 foot wide for an Opuntia Phaeacantha. It's a ground cover cactus, not an arborescent one, which is also a really key factor here, because Opuntia Phaeacantha could be integrated on tree farms, could be integrated on all types of farms already that are longer term kind of tree-like crops, right? So even the berries and stuff like that, and be living off of residual irrigation. So I give an example. I've helped avocado farms plant agave and cactus at the bases 4 or 5 feet off from their plants of avocado, and then they have the cactus producing and the agave growing great, hopefully giving a nice production one day for them. And this is a way of getting a second and third crop off of your existing farm already. So maybe you want to get into farming agave, but you don't want to let go of your existing crop. You get me? An excellent option for this, I finally did this idea this year, is to do it on a vineyard, right? So vineyards are having a really tough time. We've talked about this. If you're a vineyard, I'm sorry. It's a really tough. If you know a winemaker or a vineyard manager right now, just hug the motherfuckers, because they're going through hell right now, and we'll be lucky to survive the next 2 years. But on one farm, they had, they were like, well, we've been doing grapes for decades. Our family's been doing it for centuries. We don't want to give up grapes, even though it's unprofitable. So how about, I at first pitched to them. I said, well, let's rip all the fucking grapes out and plant cactus, and you'll make wine still. I've described this in another podcast. I was like, you'll make wine still, and you'll use 95% less water, and it's a crop that you'll never have to replant. And planting and removal costs, all these costs on vineyards are going up like fucking crazy, right? So their eyes light up. They're like, whoa, man, it sounds real cool. But still, the vines are so significant to them that many of these people will literally spend millions to just keep them and not get rid of that, right? Which I honestly admire. I talked many times about, it's not the money, it's why you do the farm, right? And they are fucking winemakers. They don't want to get rid of their grapes, right? So I said, okay. I understand you're not going to make any money from the grapes. I understand you want to keep the grapes, but you want to fucking move on, right? You want to try something else, and hopefully, I told him in 5-10 years the grapes are somewhere different, right? So I told him, all right, let's try this. Let's start farming fucking agave and cactus at the base of the grapes. So he has the grapes around 4 feet tall for easy picking for harvesters. Now, we left a little row in between, like for instance, say there's a 8-foot spacing in between 2 rows of grapes. On the 4-foot center, we started planting agave and cactus, which means he can no longer use a tractor for his grapes anymore, right? But we use electrical netting on both sides of that and run goats through it. So that's not an issue, right? It's actually way better for the plants and farm and everything. But point being, now he's starting to make some money off of the grapes or the cactus, and he started to make some cactus wine now 2 years in. Not 2 years in, sorry, 2 months in. And he's got some of his first prickly pears, right? So he doesn't have a lot of production, obviously. It's like they're still fresh pads. But because it's time for them to fruit, they started fruiting already for the dude, which is really cool. And he started making his first little batch of wine, right? So I was like, hey man, that's the future. Like, just let's start trying to make some money with this stuff. And, you know, this may become the main business. It may be the keep the grape in business. But whatever it is, at least you're making some money in the meantime while this whole grape situation figures its fucking self out, right? Because over the next few years, whoever's going to go bankrupt is going to go bankrupt, and the wine industry will not die. It will evolve into something completely different. I've said forever, I think the industry would go from, 700,000 acres to around 100. And I think 100 would be something that would keep grapes extremely profitable and make California wines an extremely high quality product. And it looks like we're going to maybe get to that, right? Because this year, we had thousands and thousands of acres go unharvested, and the ones that did lost a lot of money. So that won't go on for several more years. Lots of people are taking the wine or the vineyards out, and yeah, it may be fucking crazy. We may go from 600,000 acres. I mean, we cut in 1 year, I think 60,000 acres. So, if this continues for just, say, 4 years, it could potentially get rid of a third, half the industry, right? Which, as I said, may not be a bad thing. But anyways, the Opuntia was allowing people to have something to farm in the meantime, right? So that was something really cool. And going back to that point why I brought this story up, the phaecantha can live off of the irrigation that is just in the area in the majority of the country. They could take the conditions of the majority of the country. And this phaecantha, why I'm even growing it, is that, as I mentioned, it's very fast growing and produces lots of pads and fruit. And the fruits are, nicknamed tulip prickly pear, right? Well, the fruits are purple, and they may be pink at times. And these fruits will be about the size of a golf ball, but very, very, good for you and juicy and full of antioxidants, So it was a prickly pear I was really excited to cultivate because I loved eating it, right? And another part of it that a lot of people don't like are the seeds. It has a lot of seeds, but they're very small and they're edible as well. And as we've explained many times before, the seeds are actually the most nutritional dense part of the cacti. So not a bad thing to fucking eat once in a while. But anyway, some people dislike them. And, the seeds, we started taking them out and selling jams out of this Opuntia Phaeacantha prickly pear. That way people could have something that didn't have the seeds, but they could still consume the fruit, right? And then I was selling seeds, but I could only sell so much fucking seeds to people. And I started to say, well, what the fuck am I going to do with all these seeds, right? Started making prickly pear seed oil out of them, And I realized, wow, this is a whole other industry that, I was fucking sleeping on. That's great. So, to give you, I probably should have mentioned this in my fucking prickly pear seed oil podcast, but, some high quality Opuntia ficus indica prickly pear seed oils may go for 1 liter for $3,000 to $5,000. Now, keep in mind, this is a monoculture, chemical intensive likely, Opuntia ficus indica, that obviously when it is grown in this low quality way, it's producing low quality fruit, in my opinion, right? So if you are maintaining your Opuntia with chemicals and tractors, the soil is really unhealthy and can only produce such, quality fruit, right? So the point I'm making here is that while this sounds like it's extremely high price, say $3,000-$5,000 for 1 liter, you need about 1 ton of prickly pear seeds to make that liter. So there is a lot of waste that's going to happen if you're not utilizing the fruit, right? So it basically has to be a whole other side thing to your main business, right? Because you're going to be getting rid of a lot of the fruit. But anyways, the other point I wanted to make here is that What do you think a California grown Opuntia without chemicals in a polyculture, in a system that prioritizes indigenous knowledge will fetch, right? What is that prickly pear seed oil worth? Just throwing it out there, could it potentially be twice or 3 times the quality or cost? In my opinion, yes. So, I am going to start making prickly pear seed oils out of a lot of the different Opuntia. And because they are being grown that way, we're definitely going to be selling them for a lot higher fucking price, right? And if you want that quality, you're going to have to pay the price. You know what I mean? Like, because, and that's the other thing too, where you have to have lots of alternatives, right? Like, I know I'm going on lots of tangents today, but it's like, okay, say I make a bunch of this prickly pear seed oil and nobody wants to buy it at the price I want, right? Say $15,000 a 1 liter. Well, guess what? I'm going to be making my own luxurious fucking beauty products, right? Salves, creams, hair products, deodorant, whatever the fuck, and selling it as well. And I will be, utilizing that prickly pear seed oil and getting, that price out of the product that I'm creating. So, point is, you want to be selling it at a sustainable price for you, at a price that's whether the Opuntia pads, fruit, the seed oil, if you're producing fucking quality. I'll give you an example. Like, I know people that grow cactus just like me, and they're over there selling the fucking prickly pears for the same price that people pay in the store. These are fucking months old prickly pears coming from Mexico that have lost a lot of their nutritional value. That to begin with, there wasn't much because, as I mentioned, it was grown in a fucking monoculture, heavy till, heavy chemical system. And, these fruits, people talk about prickly pears being a superfood. And I'm over here talking to you about how this fruit is grown in such a low quality. And I've been on many of those farms. I'm not just speaking out my ass here. People are still mentioning it's a superfood. And I'm like, well, what do you think the fruit would be if it fucking actually is grown correctly like the indigenous did for thousands of years? I mean, we're talking about an extremely superfood, maybe. Some fucking superfood, Because if that low quality prickly pear that's grown in that way is being, shown to have such great benefits, I can't imagine, like I said, what the benefits would be when it's actually grown correctly. So once again, going back to the Opuntia Phaeacantha, whatever products that you're making out of these USA native species, demand the price that they're worth, because you're not, working for free here, man. But anyways, yeah, the prickly pear seed oil is maybe the sleeper in the cacti farm's sustainability or profitability goals. But going back to the point that Phaeacantha had a lot of seeds, and I didn't really give a fuck about them, and I found use for them. And I guess the lesson that I want you to learn from that is the story I just gave, is that you have to have an alternative always for something. These peach farmers that had only Del Monte to sell peaches to, they're dumbasses, to be honest with you. You're running $1 million business and you have one fucking buyer? Like, come on, bro. Like, even if you have $1 million contract of prickly pear seed oil lined up, in your back pocket, have a product that you may make if that fucking deal comes, follows through. Have a backup buyer. Have a alternative place that you can utilize this, right? Because what happens if you don't? You're going to be like these dumbass peach farmers begging for fucking the tit of the government. And be like, let me get on that titty, government, please. These fuckers should be ashamed of themselves. I've never asked for a fucking dollar from the government. I fucking denied their stimulus check. I sent that shit ripped back on it to them. Y'all needed more than me. We're fucking trillions in debt, and people fight, figuring out how to fuck our country for more tax dollars. It's like, dude, do you like this nation or not? Anyway, that's a whole other topic. But getting back to the point, that the ficantha seeds for me, you know, for some growers they're at issue, and I'm like, you guys are fucking sleeping on the uses, right? And this is kind of like the agave in Mexico, right? Like, people right now are like, we can't sell all our agave to at 1 peso, fucking free harvesting. There's no money in it. If we want people to harvest our field, we're gonna lose. Like, we gotta pay them to fucking harvest our field. Bro, if the situation is so bad, you're telling me thousands of fucking business owners, of brand owners, of farmers cannot figure out a other way of utilizing their agave. Bro, go back to your roots. Go back to your ancestors and figure out that the agave had thousands of uses, right? Because if you think the only thing you can make or sell to is agave spirits, you know what? The industry and the market is not the problem. You are. You're the fucking problem. You're the dumbass, and you shouldn't be in agave. And I've explained many times this is what's going to happen exactly to California. People growing Opuntia Phaeacantha, people growing the agave angustifolia species. Yeah, I don't think they're going to make any money if you're just fucking growing the plants and selling it into the market. Hopefully I'm wrong, but I doubt it. You know, it's like, seen this shit play out in many industries, you know, or many countries. You go to Morocco, you go to fucking, you know, different countries in North Africa, you go to Mexico, you go to Israel, you go to different places where they've begun cultivating cactus. It follows all of the same pattern, dude. So, I mean, to think we're different is, you know, definitely probably not the case. So, anyways, going back to Opuntia Phaeacantha. So, we've explained a bit how it can go all over the nation. Fast growing, cold hardy, heat hardy, wind hardy, elevation hardy, and then this cactus could produce lots of fruit and pads, right? Which is great because that's kind of the fucking goal of farming, right? So, unlike a lot of the other desertic Opuntia species, it's not going to be growing slow. So, I mean, I give an example of another cactus here that's not an Opuntia, but Echinocactus polycephalus. 1/4 inch a year growth, if you're lucky. You know, and I'm over here like, damn, bro, like, Opuntia Phaeacantha, sometimes I'll plant a pad, and by the end of the first year, it looks like a little mini bush. And I'm like, damn, you know? I planted some that I haven't watered in 3 months from pads. And they're fucking rooted, and I actually stepped on one the other day. I was very disappointed in myself because I planted so many on one night. I didn't even fucking put no flags, no nothing. They were all over the fucking farm. And I was, you know, another day at night harvesting some cactus for a client, and I stepped on one. And I was like, God damn it, done messed up there. And that sucked, you know, because I realized, oh no, it's got roots, it's rooted, it's got a little new pad. And then I checked them all, and all the little pads I planted 3 months ago all have a little new pad coming out, all have either you know, maybe some flowers or fruit developing, or developed already, or have multiple pads. You know, some of them, the standouts I call them, right? So, yeah, really exciting to see this Phaeacantha grow fucking crazy. And now we're growing the shit out of it, right? So, before we were only recycling, and now we've cut back the landscaping and the gardening, and we're focusing more on farms. That's, you know, if you're in business, you should know right now that pretty much the U.S. is in a recession. And I've said for the last 2 years that we were pretty much in a mild recession, right? So the fact of the matter is, gardening and landscaping are luxury services. And if you are in luxury services, I will advise you as a consultant, as a business owner, that you need to be very strategic these next few years, or you're not going to make it. And one of my strategies is always to pivot, not get rid of the company, not get rid of, for instance, the gardening or the landscaping, but focus on other areas while this area is low. And this is something that, conglomerates do, right? I mean, the famous saying that, some companies never lose. Some companies, I'll give an example, may be invested in XYZ, and when X goes down, Z goes up. And when Z goes down, X goes up. No matter what the fuck happens, they got it, they're profiting off that. And think of your business in a similar way, where you may have 10 modes of generating revenue, but whenever one is starting to fizzle, the economy is starting to affect it differently. And today, people are spending far, far less on luxury goods than they were 2-3 years ago, or services. In a depression, the first shit to get cut is the services. People cut their lawn guy, people cut their pool guy, people cut everything but essential. People start thinking food, gas, fucking, surviving. And that's a sad reality. But I give an example. If you're like a nail tech or some shit right now, you got to market different. You got to do something different, because right now women are going to be spending far less on their products, right? But coming back to the farming side of this, right? Like I started focusing more on the farming because I knew that the gardening and landscaping was going to go down a bit. So now we do not have as much plants that we recycle, right? Because we just don't go to this much jobs anymore and service as many people anymore. But it's gotten to the point where I felt that was a natural pivot, because we're fucking growing thousands of these bitches. We got acres of this fucking Opuntia Phaeacantha, and I've started to seed it and create different cultivars that are hardier, and the Phaeacantha, I'm gonna try to hybridize it with lots of different plants like Littoralis, like Smay, San Miguel, Adobe Espinal, like Robusta. I'm gonna try to hybridize the fuck out of it with lots of different species, because I want to add cold hardiness to all these different species that maybe aren't as cold hardy, right? So if I could give an example, Opuntia Robusta, which is maybe cold hardy to 10, and Phaeacantha is negative 20, possibly 25 if seeded, right? If I were potentially to hybridize these, some of the seeds would likely turn up anywhere from the 0 to negative 10 range of cold hardiness. Sometimes people are like, oh, it just gets added. Like, no, the new hybrid won't be negative 20 cold hardy. It's going to be somewhere in the middle. But, and some may be, right? So say you start 100 seeds, going back to Mendel's experiment in biology class, right? You may have some that are negative 20 cold hardy, some that are negative 10 cold hardy, some that are 0 cold hardy, and some that are all over the place as far as heat, wind, fruit, pads, growth, right? So your job as a cactus breeder is to weed out those seedlings for your traits, right? And that's sometimes tough things to do, because I'm like, well, this one doesn't work for me, but it may work for someone else. Maybe I want to keep it. And that's been my problem with Agave desmitiana and Agave espadina. I fucking hate those species as far as cultivating them. I like drinking them, I like utilizing them, but they don't really work well here. But because they work well for other people, my dumb ass cultivates them. So, again, you may want to use stuff like that too in Opuntia. Even if something isn't performing for you, you may want to grow it because people are actually able to buy it from you in consistent numbers, and you're able to be profitable from that. So you don't need to love something to make money on it. I tell people, the sweet spot is the intersection between what you like and makes money. You get me? Because a lot of the time, shit you like don't make money, and the shit that make money you don't like. But there's always shit in the middle that you like and makes money. Maybe it won't make as much money, or you maybe don't like it as much as your favorite, but the shit is sustainable. And those are the things I want you to focus on. Don't go for what you love the most, and don't go for what's the most profitable. Many of those times that may be a very unsustainable method for your business. So I'll give an example. It's like, what I love most is just farming. Could give fucking less about sometimes making products for people. I just want to stay on my farm, chill, be with my girl and my dogs, and that's a cool life. I'm not trying to, I'm happy with that. But to keep the farm profitable, to keep the homestead, to keep all of this in business, we gotta sell some product, right? So while I'd love to only grow pads and fruit, that's not the most profitable. And it's not what is even medium profitable as far as the cactus go, right? So, and say, for instance, how can I put this? Okay, so say the most profitable thing with the cactus might be the prickly pear seed oil, right? But if you solely focus on prickly pear seed oil, how much waste will you generate from all of that fruit? And how much, this would significantly start to hurt your sustainability, right? So you may be making the most money, but your plants you're not getting new cultivars, you're not getting new breeding, you're using all the fruit for making prickly pear oil, right? And then maybe a couple years down the line, because you're not breeding, you're not doing any of these innovations, your Opuntia may get a plague or something, and you die. And maybe if you were doing a monoculture of this Opuntia Phaeacantha because you really wanted to make a lot of prickly pear seed oil because they got a lot of seeds, and you did that because it's the most profitable, okay, for maybe a few years, but then you destroy your soil on your farm, and then you're very unsustainable as far as your carbon footprint and your water footprint. Now, I'm sure there'll be horrible corporations to do that, right? And sometimes those are what the corporations are doing. But the point being here, right? Like, I don't like or I can't just farm the pads and fruit, even though that's what I love to do, because it doesn't make money, or a lot of money. And I can't just make prickly pear seed oil, because it would be destroying the environment, destroying my farm, if I solely focused on that. So I have to make a combination of products, combination of revenue streams through Opuntia Phaeacantha to make sure that it's always being innovated, the genetics, that new products are always being developed, that I am, not putting myself in a box that will, in the long run, bite me in the ass. You get me? Because if you're a one-trick pony, as we always say, your ass is probably gonna be in a fucking cage in a fucking zoo somewhere. It's not a good way to live. But anyways, find that intersection of the most profitable and what you love the most, and that's usually the sweet spot, as I say. And you're gonna get, to maintain your farm and make money. May not be the richest dude or the happiest dude, but you will be happy and you will make money. Which at the end, what the fuck more should we ask for? So yeah, Opuntia Phaeacantha. Let's talk about its potential as erosion control, right? So its erosion potential or control potential is huge. I have a lot of wind in this area that strips the top layer of my soil, which is usually where you're amending. So the most nutritious part of your soil, right? Now it strips it down, gets rid of it, flies that shit away. Well, these Opuntia Phaeacantha are allowing more water percolation when it rains because they're slowly filtering the water into the subsoil. The covering of the soil with their pads, and you're creating a shaded environment, is allowing for less transpiration or evaporation, which means that more water that hit the soil stays. So it made more water go into the soil, and more of that water that went into the soil stayed in the soil, right? Which is crucial for the long-term success of dry farming leaves. And the wind when it's covering the ground, these Opuntia Phaeacantha, can't get rid of my soil. So it's keeping my soil in place, which is keeping it healthier, which is basically doubling the whole water thing I just described, right? Because while it prevents less evaporation and allows for more percolation, that also, and then you have the less soil being eroded. So less soil flying away means that soil is staying healthier, staying in place longer, the microbiome is growing more, the soil, is just staying healthier, you get me? Which means that it's going to be able to absorb and keep more water, but not only water, nutrients, right? The phosphorus, the nitrogen, right? The calcium, the magnesium, all these fucking key minerals, they're not going to be flying away, which is great. So on top of all of these soil benefits, Opuntia Phaeacantha is extremely drought tolerant, so it can give, the benefits I just described while not requiring a significant amount of water or even maintenance for that fact, right? Because Opuntia Phaeacantha, if you limit it or if you just let it grow wild, its mature height is only 6 feet tall and wide, right? So this means that it's going to be, with minimal trimming or with no trimming at a height that's perfectly optimal for harvesting pads and fruit, right? Whereas I give the example of Opuntia ficus indica or arborescent cacti that if you want to maintain them at a height of 4 to 6 feet for easy harvesting, you're going to have a lot of management of cutting back of these plants because they just get so tall and they can, in their later years really grow significantly very quickly. So this means that, those cacti are going to have a lot of management for the farm, right? Or add a lot of management for the farm. Whereas a Phaeacantha Opuntia or Opuntia Phaeacantha is not really going to add water pressure or any maintenance pressure, right? Because it can grow out completely to its max dimensions and it won't require those additional water or labor resources, right? Which makes it an amazing plant to cultivate because you still get to get pads and fruit like many other cacti or Opuntia, but you're not having to manage the crap out of the plant to make sure that you're having optimal fruit and pad production, right? So, not to say that you're going to have zero management, when they do reach their max height, Opuntia Phaeacantha, it will be growing very significantly and you'll need to be cutting it back quite a bit, but at that point, it's actually a benefit because you'll probably already have found a place to put your prickly pears or your Opuntia pads, right? So, or your nopales, right? And I guess hopefully, right? At least I will have by that point. And, the heavy maintenance at that point just means more profit. So, not such a big deal. Whereas, early on, if you're planting arborescent cacti, you're going to have a lot of management early on versus a few years in, right? So, some Opuntia that are arborescent in just 2 to 3 years could be, 10, 12 foot tree. So, it's important to make sure you're planting the species that you're going to be having the labor for and having the area for, right? So I'll give an example. A lot of the Opuntia Phaeacantha, it being a ground cover, could grow at the base of a lot of these arborescent cacti, and in the same space be producing double the fruit, right? So give the example, Opuntia Phaeacantha may be on the ground, and then I may have an Opuntia ficus indica cultivar Lake LA or Lancaster or High Vista, growing tall high up. Or I may have my hybrid GTO, or I may have, Burbank spineless, or, a different arborescent cacti, right? So, Culcinellifera is a great one too that turns into a tree and is arborescent. And for the most part, what I see from the USA varieties is that a lot of them are ground covers, right? The Opuntias. And this is kind of great because in cacti farming, most of the varieties that people are currently cultivating in Mexico are arborescent. Wow, that's a tongue twister there, right? But this means you could potentially, for instance, in Mexico, have a second and third or fourth crop of ground cover cacti growing on the ground on pitaya farms, right? On Stenocereus tuberis or Stenocereus Keteroensis or whatever. Forget the second word on that one, but these pitayas, or you could have them on agave farms. You could have them on Opuntia Phaeacantha farms that are growing it like the indigenous as trees. Because also a lot of these Opuntia Phaeacantha farms, they keep their stuff really low, like 2-3 feet, just for crazy production, right? Because once those root systems and cacti have established and developed, if they're kept really short, I mean, dude, you're going to be out there every few days cutting back shit. And for them, I guess that means revenue. Not so sure it means profit, because in Mexico, most nopales are less than a peso, so most nopaleros, it's kind of like the agavero situation, where many of them are on the brink of bankruptcy or going, or already bankrupt and don't know it. They grow a monoculture of the same species, so it's very similar to the agave angustifolia, where the price is on the fucking ground in Jalisco and Oaxaca, because it just has been over cultivated and it's all the same shit. So you grow a bunch of the same shit. Anybody who has taken economics will tell you that when the supply of something goes through the fucking roof, the price drops to the fucking floor. That's also why we preach diversification of products and species, because again, if you're a one-trick pony, you're fucked. But anyways, because they do grow all these Opuntia, that are pumping out production so heavily and maintain very low, they're spending a lot on labor, and they're selling these into the market when there's a huge oversupply. Similar to the agaveros in this sense, that why don't they make cactus bioethanol, cactus methane? Why don't they make cactus different? There's a fucking 1,000 uses, man, just like agave, right? But they shoot themselves in the foot, put themselves in a box always by, we're going to grow one species, we're going to sell it to one market, and hopefully it goes well for us. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know what's wrong with some of these farmers, that they believe that they don't have to plan shit, or don't have to be strategic or adaptable. I've been doing it this way for a fucking 100 years. Alright, man. Well, when you're at a business, let me know how much the land is. Because that's where a lot of those guys are heading, anyways, if, a lot of the same lessons from Mexican agave could be applied to Mexican cacti and California cacti and agave, right? Because very similar circumstances are going to occur, right? I give the example that I've even seen some universities begin to study planting Opuntia Phaeacantha, and some farms have gotten grants to plant it, and I'm just like, okay, yeah, man, don't learn anything from Mexico, right? Like the monoculture that's destroyed the price of cactus, that's destroyed the quality of cactus, that's destroyed the ecosystem in which these cacti are native from, same shit that's happening in agave, will be replicated in California if everyone is doing this stupid, idiotic copy of Mexican monoculture of cactus. And it's really sad, as I mentioned, when there's fucking thousands of cultivars and subspecies that you can grow from the Opuntia, the Cereus, the Trichocereuses, the Stenocereuses. Like, there's like fucking an insane amount of shit in cactus that is able to be cultivated. You get me? The fact they all grow one type, kind of sad. And the funny part is, this isn't even Mexico. This shit happens in Morocco. It happens in Northern Africa. It happens in, places that are beginning to cultivate cacti, in the Middle East. It's hilarious how they all commit the same blatant mistake. It's like they think, it's all related. It's hilarious because, this shit that's happening with citrus now is very much how the world is dealing with fucking Opuntia. You get me? All the countries are planting Opuntia ficus indica, and then, 10, 20 years down the line, they're like, why is all of our industry dying? Like fucking, what do you call it? The northern African countries are dealing with cochineal at the moment, and they're talking about losing potentially, hundreds of acres of Opuntia production that is Opuntia ficus indica, right? Which is really significant in some of these countries because, there's some North African countries that grow 500,000-600,000 acres of Opuntia. So for a country to lose, tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of acres, it's a huge economic blow. You get me? But they do it to themselves, man. It's like, what we were talking about earlier with the peach farmers as well. It's like they got one buyer, they got one species, they got one way of doing things. And when that way goes to shit in this chaotic, globalistic world, they go to shit. And it's super sad because, as I mentioned, they could be cultivating a whole bunch of different shit. So the North African nations that just copied Mexico's species and their monoculture and their tillage and their chemicals and their high labor, their high management, the high irrigation. I laugh so hard whenever I see irrigation lines on cactus farms because I'm just like, oh, that's all I need to see. The guy's a dumbass. You know what I mean? It's like, and then the same farmers will be like, why do I have so much plague? Why do I have so much insects? Why are all of the wildlife attacking specifically my cacti? I don't know, man. Maybe because you created the perfect fucking host environment for all of those things. Many of these farmers, they want you to feel bad for them, when in reality, it's their own causation that's leading to this issue. And people will say, oh, well, it's the government. They force us all to plant the same. Dude, like, stop placing the blame on everybody but yourself. It's your fault. If you're not a profitable cactus or agave farmer, 99.9% of the time it's your fault. You know what I mean? Because it's an amazing plant. It has thousands of fucking uses. It has thousands of species, both agave and cacti. So, if you didn't find your niche, that sounds like a personal issue. That's not a macroeconomic issue. Okay? And sure, you can say, oh, well, there's a depression, there's a fucking this government, or this president, or that president. Dude, I've made money under every president, and I've made money in depressions, I've made money in recessions, I've made money in fucking times when it was, the Goldilocks times. The difference is the person, not the fucking, economic climate or the political climate, right? So I laugh whenever I hear of a lot of these farmers asking for government aid when they are doing this type of agricultural system. But anyway, getting back to Opuntia Phaeacantha here, unlike cactus or agave, you're going to have production your first year, as I mentioned with that winery that planted it 2 months ago. You may not have an incredible amount of production, but you will have some production your first year, and you can experiment making whatever products or finding the markets or figuring out what you got to do, which is great, right? Because I always tell people, I'm like, all right, well, people in agave are waiting till year 7, year 10 to figure out what the fuck to do with their agave. Cactus gets that out the way early. It gives you a little product, it gives you a little room to make stuff, and it, then the next year or the next 2 years, when you actually have a sizable production, then you know where to put this production, right? Just 1 to 3 years in versus agave. Here's what I always tell people too. People, they tell me, well, I'm gonna pre-sell my agave, and it's on year like 2 or 3, and I'm like, dude, you can't even guarantee that. You're just gonna set yourself up for liabilities. Because I give an example. What if you sold all of your agave to a distillery, and that distillery said, hey, Steve, we're going to pay you for the agave early. We're going to give you this $1 million. I'm like, great. Haven't even fucking finished growing the agave. I got it sold. Sounds great, right? Psych. Year fucking 7, as I'm waiting to harvest this agave, crazy rains come. Crazy fucking rains. And I live in Northern California. I mean, in this scenario, right? And my agave are sitting in a fucking pool of water for months. And these agave begin to rot and get disease and get weevil and ultimately die. What's going to happen when you can't fucking provide the plants and you've already signed the contract and they've already fucking paid you? That's going to happen to a few people, I know it, and it's going to suck. So, while you do have to be looking for where to put your agave, right, it's a tricky situation there. That's not going to happen with the cactus, which is why I'm talking about that, because it's complete opposite. You know exactly, okay, every year I'm going to get pads, or fruit in spring. You know, I'm going to get pads in every season, right? I'm going to get flowers in spring. You know, you can plan for these things. Agave, dude, you don't know if it's what season it's going to pop out, or what year, or what month. That's a very tough thing to plan for. I'll tell you what. You know, because even if a distillery had bought your production, what if the price just magically dropped that you had sold for? Well, you'll be stuck in the situation that many Mexican farmers have, which is the companies will find legal loopholes and everything to get the fuck out of the deal. And then you're stuck with all of this agave that was pre-sold and now has no place. And many companies in Mexico have gone bankrupt doing those exact deals. So, you know, I really like agave, but I don't grow agave because it's easy. Cactus, on the other hand, is a much easier crop to grow, and there's, like I said, lots of different advantages from having, cultivating a crop that's going to give you, a lot of money with the prickly pears every year, and some money every single month with the pads, right? And that could be in the form of raw material sale or in the form of you creating products with all those raw materials. But the point being, you're able to profit maybe 15 times off of this cactus a year versus agave once every decade potentially. So that's, where I believe Phaeacantha, a lot of people that are planting agave, starts to become attractive to them. And some of the farmers that I've been selling a lot of cactus to are actually agave farmers that are finding it to be a little bit more, how would I describe this? More of a chaotic industry than they imagined. Many of these people were sold that agave was going to be extremely easy to grow, that they were going to be able to make lots of money with it at the end because there's a huge demand for it. And the fact of the matter is, those are all lies. There may be a demand for agave, but no one truly knows what that demand may be or not be because the plants don't exist yet. So you can't say, oh, well, we made 1,000 bottles last year of California agave spirits, and now we think there's a demand for 1,000% more. According to who? The distilleries? If your agave doesn't hit those distilleries, they'll find something else to fucking make. You know what I mean? It's, many of the distilleries today working in agave is like their fucking side project. They're like little thing on the side there. Many of them are making gins, vodkas, brandies, and whiskeys that are craft and are the mainstay business. You know what I mean? Like, they're just leaving this thing of agave on the side to make sure that they don't obviously get caught with their pants down if this industry explodes. Now, I'm not saying that demand doesn't exist that people are talking about, but I'm saying it's very tough to prove and even tougher for you to get a slice of it because, when there starts being like I give the example today, if you have agave, anybody will pay the price you want for it, and mostly you can choose where you want that agave to go to. Now, in a few more years, when there's lots of different farmers in lots of different economic situations, what happens when there's a lot of competition for the small number of distilleries that are asking for this agave? We're going to have the same issue that Mexico has. And that's why, to be honest with you, I've been distancing myself a bit from the agave because I don't really see the potential for small farmers to succeed in this market quite yet. The way I'm doing it, of course, but I'm saying like in general, right? Like most of the, I think, agave spirits that is created in California will be coming from large farms. And, they'll definitely be the cheaper spirits and stuff, so. But anyway, I don't even know how I got on this agave right now. Oh yeah, I remember just comparing it to the difference of Opuntia Phaeacantha, right? And how you can harvest it much more often and have the ability to make revenue much more often and consistently, right? So that's a very helpful thing, right? So now getting back on track here, talk about some of the uses of Opuntia Phaeacantha, right? And there's a numerous amount of uses for this cactus, but I'll try to list off a few of them, and you can try to maybe see if one of these niches work for you, right? I keep mentioning it, but I'll reiterate it again. Don't be a one-trick pony, But the first one, obviously, would be alcohol. I mean, you can make prickly pear spirits. You can make prickly pear wine. You can make prickly pear brandy. People think brandy is made out of a certain thing but it could, it's a way of creating a spirit. It's not necessarily a certain material that goes into it. And this is the same thing with vodka, for instance, now, right? There's like agave vodkas. I mean, you can make a cactus vodka, right, out of the prickly pears if you distilled the fruit. You can make, types of beverages such as, juices and smoothies, different types of drinks. You can make prickly pear ice cream. You can make it's just very numerous the ways that you can utilize these prickly pears and fruit, right? But some of my favorite ways that I've found some profit in are creating jams. People buy a lot of jam. And I like to tell people, too, whenever you're thinking of what product can I use my agave, my cactus for, start to think, kind of like my friend Fabio said on a podcast one time, make something that everybody uses every day, right? So if you create energy, right? People use energy every day. If you create gas, people use gas every day, right? If you create, for instance, cacti fiber toilet paper, again, a use every day, right? You could use feminine products made out of prickly or cactus fibers. You could be making, types of cardboard packaging, that are compostable and recyclable. You could be using it as a forage. Obviously, we do that with the goats. Even some months are up to 50% of their diet agave and cactus, depending on which we have the more of, right? But this also means that you're going to have lots of manures that are coming from these cacti, right? And if you have a lot of animals and you have a lot of cactus, then a bioethanol production and biomethane production may be, a great avenue for you to explore to utilize a lot of those resources, right? And if you are able to become your own energy company and sell, gas or, energy in the form of electricity back to the grid or to customers, that's a nice little business model there, right? You could make silage. A lot of people that live in colder climates, really have to import and store lots of grass or feed for the winter months. And if you're a cactus or agave farmer, you could be making silage out of these plants and storing it year round and having it available for your animals to consume, in the winter or the colder months when forage has been eliminated or dropped. That way you're not having to buy feed at, here's the problem with the wintering sometimes of pastures, right? That people have to buy the hay that they may need in winter in summer, because if they buy it in winter, it's going to be extremely expensive. But if they buy it in summer, then they've tied up essentially money that they were going to utilize or is allocated for winter now in summer, 6 months ahead of schedule, which means that there's going to be a cash crunch potentially on that farm if they need, a really large volume of feed, right? So, why not start your own silage operation, right, and utilize that agave and cactus? And I think, this may be a really great option for, cattle farmers as well in the central portion of this country, even here in California, right? Because they could, they're usually in high forage areas with high water, which are usually these areas too that have a pretty tough winter, right? Like in the center portion of the country, the northern portion, and even Texas, right? So, well, Texas might be a whole other shit, man. But the thing I'm getting at is that they're having to in some of these states, like say Nebraska or Arkansas or did I say Kansas? Kansas, Nebraska, Iowa, those places that grow a significant amount of corn. There's a lot of cattle farmers there too, because they utilize that corn to fatten up the cows, and then I'm not sure if I call them farmers, right? I mean, there's a lot of animal feed operations that require this corn, and they fatten those cattle up, and that's a lot of the cattle that goes into our meat production for the country. So, I imagine a world where you could potentially have that system in a lot of other states, right? Like, that system works great there because they get so much rain that they can cultivate corn, right? And many of those farms are cultivating it dry farm, which means that they're just planting the corn, much like in Mexico, and it's coming out. And they're not having to irrigate it. So you could potentially have this kind of like corn rancher model, right, with agave or cactus all over the USA in dry areas, right, where they don't get so much rain as Iowa and Nebraska or, the corn capitals. You could potentially be growing agave and cactus, foraging your cattle. When the forage goes down, you start feeding, agave and cactus as a supplement. And then when the forage is gone, you would have hopefully already began your silage operation and have some available of the agave and cactus. And in many of these regions, the agave and cactus won't fall asleep during the winter, so you'll still even have pad production and be able to supplement the silage production, right? So that model, I keep saying it, but it's a shame that farmers and ranchers became two separate things, because they used to be the same. The farmer was the rancher, right? Guy grew corn, he had pigs or cattle or goats or sheep or whatever. Nowadays, the ranchers are just ranchers and the farmers are just farmers, and then the ranchers have this huge fucking manure issue, and the farmers have this huge fucking fertilizer issue, or, maybe the ranchers have a feed issue, and then the farmers have an issue where they're having to sell feed for hella cheap, right? But if they were both in one, then you'd have, cheap production of agave and cactus, say, dry farmed, those animals running on forage, and then you have high profitability because you are creating all of your own feed, A lot of these cattle operations where they start to lose their money is on the buying of feed. So if you can potentially get rid of all of that and just say, for instance, grow cactus or agave and create, your silage, then, you'll have a really, really highly profitable ranching operation. So once again, maybe more ranchers need to be farmers again, and more farmers need to be ranchers again. So getting back to the uses, though, the prickly pears, you can make sweeteners out of it. You can make dried sugar. You can make dried powder out of the pads as well. And all of these have different applications, but like, say the dried pad powder can be, encapsulated and taken as supplements. You can utilize it for smoothies and different drinks, and, use it as a supplement to a lot of the stuff that you may be cooking, right? Which is a great option. The prickly pear sweeteners are very great as well. Not quite the consistency of honeys or agave syrup. It is in its own category. But, you could have that in a liquid or a dry form, The prickly pear seeds, are creating hundreds of millions of dollars in cosmetics nowadays. And, you could press your own seed oil, cold press, hot press. You could use those seed oils to make your own cosmetics, whether it is something like a lotion or whether it's something like a hair product, or, we've made salves. There's a huge variety of uses for that prickly pear. Or you may even decide to sell it raw if you're producing, large quantities of it. But I think one of my favorite uses is the potential of this Opuntia Phaeacantha serving as a important part of restoration of the Mojave Desert ecosystem, and the restoration of or not the restoration, sorry, the carbon capture potential, right? So if you're growing, say, a perennial cactus, and even if you didn't want to sell any of it, it would lock in a large amount of carbon, being a perennial that is always consistently growing, right? Especially if you're propagating that plant out and always adding to that carbon potential. So I envision a world where, I think I've talked about this in a podcast before, cactus farmers will be paid for the carbon that their farms are capturing and storing. And unlike an agave farm that has to figure out a way to utilize this agave at its end of life, or all of that carbon capture that it's done over, say, 7, 15, 20 years goes straight back into the air. I give one example, right? Like, people talk about the carbon capture of agave and how it's a perennial, much like I'm describing cactus right now, all these great benefits, right? The difference is that, say they grew for 10 years the agave, and then they harvest it all and light the field on fire, or grow a whole bunch of other monoculture crops, or, rip that soil up, rip those plants up. A lot of that is going to be thrown right back into the air. So the potential carbon capture benefits that those agave maybe had are lost, and that's why many of these carbon capture projects that are involving agave, they're almost having to become distillers or having to become product manufacturers, because if that agave dies and it rots in place, there's going to be a lot of carbon going back into the air from those farms, that we're one day seen as sustainable or whatever, right? Well, this issue is completely avoided with cactus because it's a perennial that could live for 100 years. I've seen cacti Opuntia that are arborescent trees and mounds that have lived for potentially 80 to 150 years. No one really, it's not like these guys have tree rings, but based on annual growth rates, based on spread rates and these things, we can start to estimate of it. And we see that some of these Opuntia are old as shit. Even in LA County, I've photographed and cut down, I've replanted, for instance, 50-year-old, 70-year-old Opuntia trees. You get me? And that's just in an area that's recently developing, right? Like Los Angeles, on the global stage, right? Because these guys been forever in Mexico and all over the USA, right? But the bio or the carbon capture with cactus is just going to be much more significant here. And if you're a cactus farmer that wants to start to get into this, I would find ways to accurately measure and quantify the amount of carbon that your plants are capturing, because you could potentially be selling those as carbon capture credits to large organizations such as Microsoft or whatever, pick your billion-dollar institution. And there will be a lot of money in this, I've described before how there was like a $2 billion project in Africa that is being pitched like this, that I highly disagreed with what the hell they're going to do, though. So, for example, they're going to plant, this is their idea, right? They're going to plant 100,000 acres or whatever of Opuntia Phaeacantha to try to carbon capture it. But they're getting rid of the native ecosystem. They are irrigating. This is a monoculture. This is a heavy till, heavy labor, heavy chemical operation. To be honest with you, the shit that they removed will probably capture more carbon than the fucking project that they are instituting. Now, the fact that they're going to water these cacti that can be dry farmed in a water-scarce region is going to put high pressure on those water systems. The fact that it's a monoculture means that it will run into the same problem that agave is, which they may grow 10, 20 years correctly or okay, and then a plague comes and just fucking knocks it the fuck out, much like the agave dying at the end of its lifetime, right? And why is that important? Because that carbon capture project will not capture any carbon. To be honest with you, I think if you did the science and math on it, to be honest, they'd probably figure out that they're actually going to be putting more carbon in the air by creating a project of this size and this magnitude and this management style. And that's where I understand where a lot of people come in and say carbon capture projects and carbon credits are all scams, because of organizations like this that like to preach and talk about all the great things that they're going to do with their carbon capture project, but in the end, it's really a piece of shit project that never does anything for the world except take billions of dollars and give it to executives, because somehow all these motherfuckers are getting away with this at the same time. That's always amazed me, right? Because if all of the world's carbon capture projects were actually not scams, dude, we would have solved climate change decades ago. You know what I mean? It's like, it's pretty sad industry, but that doesn't mean that you can't be doing it correctly. You could actually have a polyculture. You could actually have a polyculture. You could actually not till. You could have a multi-species diversity of agave and cactus growing, and you could actually have a tremendous amount of carbon capture and create lots of credits that you could be selling to institutions, governments, whatever the fuck, and making lots of money that way. And it may come that some farmers may not sell their cactus at all because this exists. And to be honest with you, I've said 1,000 times, I really don't give a fuck how I profit off of the cactus or agave. As long as it's like something that's moral or ethical, I'll do it, dude. It's not like I'm like, oh yeah, I only want to make spirits, or oh, I only want to make biomethane or biofuels or sweeteners or whatever the fuck, wine. No, I try lots of different things, so I have it in my pocket. You get me? And I can adapt and do all of them. And when I see stuff that's far outperforming, I focus. And it's really, that's really the way to fucking do it, to be honest with you. The point is, I just would like to farm and live my happy ass life. I make lots of products or innovations or different, things on the farm because I want to maintain that fucking dream and great life that I have. Now, why do I mention that? As I was describing earlier, yeah, one of the things that you niche down in, maybe not something that you like all that much, right? You may be a winemaker and you find that cactus spirits are where you make most profit. And you may want to focus on that so that you can always be making cactus wine in a craft form, in a high quality form, and always having your homestead or your farm in a profitability state to allow you to do whatever the fuck you want with your free time. You get me? Like, that's how you gotta think about shit, You have to realize that to maintain a farm, people have fought. And if you think you're not gonna fight to maintain that farm, you're very mistaken. You know what I mean? We're not in the fucking world that your parents or my grandparents lived in anymore. It's not the same fucking climate. It's not the same political systems. It's not the same fucking economies. And what worked for them will not work for us. We can look towards the indigenous, our parents, our grandparents for inspiration to what to do in the future, but what worked for them is not going to work for us. And that's important to note because that means that you actually have a chance. Because all of the controlling agricultural interests of today think that they will always be in power. Whereas there's lots of innovation to be had because of this changing climate, political, and economic systems, which means that small farmers that innovate will be rewarded and will be able to, scale to what they want to. Some of these larger organizations, for example, that were on low margin of maybe 5-10% as soon as this Iran war happened, started to panic, and many of them have filed for bankruptcy because they know with the cost of fertilizer today that 10% margin that they had is gone, and that if they produce the crop without subsidies, they will lose a tremendous amount of money and not be in business anymore. And this is where stuff like the Farm Bill usually is saving farmers or corporate farmers' backs, which is a real issue in our country, to be honest with you, because we shouldn't be subsidizing and prioritizing shitty agricultural systems. You get me? Like, that's kind of like what I was trying to describe earlier with the citrus situation, because, look, the same shit that's happening in California happened in Florida. Florida tried to do the same fucking shit. They try to lock it all down, quarantine, all this shit. Look, HLB is a natural fucking insect that is existent in the Asian citrus region, okay? Citrus comes from Asia, mainly places like China, and these citrus varieties have lived with HLB for eternity, motherfucker. HLB has been a way for nature to regulate citrus, okay? And what do you think nature thinks of all this monoculture, heavy till, heavy chemical bullshit that Florida and California created? It doesn't like it, okay? It's hilarious to me that the only really beautiful looking fucking citrus left in Florida is in the wild. You get me? Unless they're using, lots of chemicals and shit, which, it's kind of like a fake person, It looks good on paper, but it's really a really unhealthy individual. So a lot of those Florida farmers that still have oranges are doing it in a really nasty way and fucking themselves because it's going to go away real soon. But the point being that, this system is a system that that nature wants to destroy for a reason, that it's a really shitty plant. It doesn't allow for genetic variation and innovation, which is one of nature's highest priorities. Why the fuck do you think it created seeds and created for the ability to seeds to have genetic variance, right? This is due to the fact that it wants to constantly innovate. And when it sees our systems here in California, it must laugh pretty hard, because a monoculture of citrus will never be saved, ever. You could quarantine the whole fucking country. You won't save that industry. And, I'll bet anybody here $1,000 that in a decade or two, California's citrus will be mostly gone, just like happened with Florida, because they're doing the same fucking problems. You know what I mean? Like, they're getting rid of citrus that has HLB, but is resistant. So the few varieties that hold the keys to growing citrus in California and Florida without these plagues, they're killing them just because they have the plague. There are countless varieties that have been proven already to be HLB resistant and continue producing fruit very, very productively. If you kill all those, you will only accelerate the citrus industry's decline. Okay? All this to say that the same shit will happen to cactus and agave. The example of citrus is a great one, because it shows that when you have an ineffective government that does not understand science, they're going to kill the industry, And to be honest with you, all they're doing is allowing corporate farmers a few more years. That's not going to help anyone, because the few innovative citrus farmers that are actually trying to figure out the varieties and hybrids and cultivars that are going to fucking be the future of citrus may not make it if these governments are propping up the big citrus growers that are destroying the ecosystem. We're basically subsidizing really horrible practices, But yeah, all this to say that Opuntia will go through a very, very similar thing here in California. And now you may think I'm over exaggerating, but this citrus story is real crucial to any fucking monoculture systems that are being developed. And an Opuntia system that's being developed here in California, mimicking the North Africans and the Mexicans, will incur the same problems, So, yeah, if you want to make sure that you have cactus that is doing the most carbon capture possible, you have to make sure that it's grown correctly in a polyculture system that utilizes no chemicals or tillage, right? Because the soil is your prime important substrate there. Now, getting back to some of these uses, the nursery and plant trade are really important, right? Because you may decide that you want to be a cactus nursery and provide to landscapers and gardeners all of these plants to have, some high quality, not grown with chemicals or straight bullshit, right? And that's a great thing too, because, I loved putting in cactus in gardens, because, it was always an easy thing to pitch to landscaping customers. You're going to get pads to eat. You're going to get flowers to eat. You're going to get fucking fruit to eat. You're never going to have to water this shit. You're going to fucking be very low maintenance on this plant, compared to, say, a lot of the plants in landscaping are sold by nurseries to be high fucking maintenance, because many of these nurseries are directly providing the services and maintenance of these properties. So if I give an example, right? Like my cactus gardens and agave gardens, I would almost never ever visit. It would be an installation. I would set up some irrigation if it was needed, and never look back at those projects. I come back every year or whatever. They look fucking amazing, Now I install another project like a French or an English garden or tropical gardens, stuff like that. Fruit tree, lots of fruit trees, and then you start to get into the issue that these gardens, say they might have paid $10,000 for a landscaping installation cost. Dude, they might be spending fucking $10,000 every 6 months for the rest of their year on maintaining that property. You get me? So think about it like that as a farmer too sometimes. But, you know, I will say that in the nursery trade, there is lots of money in cactus. The thing is that you have to know how to sell direct to consumer, because if you're going to be selling wholesale, you're going to be running into a very similar issue that we've been describing with the agave and Opuntia this whole podcast, which is you're not going to be making the whole pie, and there's not going to be a lot of money there for you. You get me? Because usually the person that's hitting the consumer last is the person making the most money. You get me? So I give the example of dairy, right? You got cattle farmers, and then you have them milking those fucking cows, and then, you know, that dairy's being pasteurized, whatever, and being sent all over to different markets. Well, what happens a lot of the time is that the person generating the most profit on that is actually the store selling you the milk, and sometimes even less than 10% of the actual whole amount of the revenue generated from that milk goes to a farmer. That's very similar in most commodities. So say like, you know, an almond farmer may be getting like 5-10 cents compared or of the dollar of almonds being sold in the store, or the same with a tomato, a grape, or whatever, you know. Now the farmer that creates products now, though, they're chilling. They're making the whole 100%. When I sell a goat, I've grown the feed for the goat. I own the land where the forage is in existence for this goat. When I sell the goat, it's complete profit because I put almost nothing into that goat besides my labor. And most of the times I'm not charging myself, right? So that's free in this case, and it allows me to produce goats very efficiently. So I'm describing to you how the nursery could be good business, but many of the times it's very similar here, where a lot of the wholesale operations, nurseries that are growing these plants for smaller nurseries and stuff, they're not making a huge margin. Now, the nursery that is growing and retailing that plant at the same time, not wholesaling it, but retailing it, they will make the most money. So, you know, in my case, I farm and I sell to wholesalers and retailers, and it's great money in cactus. But, like everything, it's all in your management. If you're highly irrigating, highly managing your cactus, may not be a lot of profit in selling them, right? It may be best kept for products that you want to make, because at least plant sales versus a lot of those different products that you can create out of cactus will be lower return, but you know, the benefit there is you don't need costly machines, costly warehouses, costly manufacturing and processing, right? So yeah, you can't always win, you know what I mean? Like, you may have something that's highly profitable, like say prickly pear seed oils, but you may need, you know, a lot of processing capability. So may not be something that you could just directly start up as a small farmer, unless you're a little you know, you gotta be intelligent with how you use your resources. Now, another use for Opuntia Phaeacantha that I've described a lot, because, you know, we farm agave too, is that Opuntia Phaeacantha is an excellent trap crop for agave farms. If you are dry farming agave and cactus in the same field, many times you cannot afford to lose the piña of that agave versus having an Opuntia Phaeacantha, you know, all bitten up and feeding that wildlife, right? So if you have gophers, if you have ground squirrels, if you have jackrabbits, if you have coyotes, if you have deer, many times they will go for a much more succulent cactus than an agave, because the agave is really tough to get to the portion, you know, that base where a lot of that sugar is held, versus the, you know, prickly pears are easily eaten and the pads are easily eaten. Now, the key difference there, though, is that an Opuntia Phaeacantha could be completely eaten to the ground and will come back and still that whole time be developing a root system, right? So you can have very established plants of Opuntia Phaeacantha serving as trap plants for your agave, and that way wildlife is not munching up your agave, and it may be munching up, 10-20% of your cactus, but you're not even going to notice it because of the production of this Opuntia Phaeacantha being so great. So essentially, I grow natives and cacti to feed my native wildlife, and that keeps them off my agave, which is not native. All right, so many of them at least. I guess many of the cacti too, right? But the point is that this wildlife prioritizes many times this cactus over the agave because of its palatability. So making, for instance, trap plants be grown with your agaves and cactuses, with your agave is the way to go. Another great trap plant for cactus in this case will be nasturtiums if you're in an area where it doesn't freeze, or native shrubbery such as, I give the example here. We're propagating a lot of ambrosia salsosa and ambrosia dumosa next to our plants. And, these strong, scented plants like ambrosias, such as the creosotes, the rabbit brushes, a lot of these herbal California native shrubs can be planted and dry farmed alongside the cactus and be essentially repelling mosquitoes that may go after your animals, be repelling aphids, weevils, and different type of insects that may be affecting your agave or cacti, right? So while cactus is an excellent trap plant for agave, there are excellent trap plants for the cacti as well, because it will have very similar insect pressures and stuff like that, right? So for rodent and small predator wildlife, the cactus could be the trap plant, but for insects, the cactus has the same susceptibilities as many of these agave, right? So everything from aphids to cochineal to mites to different viral and fungi infections, they affect many of the succulent family collectively. So agave and cactus cannot help each other in this way. You know what I mean? You need to plant native shrubbery, strong scents, and like the Amish learn this really well, right? Like the Amish with their vegetables plant tons and tons of herbs to, yes, have herbs and produce production from them, but also they serve the purpose as being the trap plants for the insects and the infections that may attract their or be attracted to their plants, right? So another example of that would be, using stuff like birds, right? So you can use guinea fowl and chickens and geese and ducks. They love insects, and when you run them through your fields, if they are any insects on your cacti or agave, they are a great natural way to get rid of less of this. And you can get this knowledge in real time from rice farmers that utilize ducks in Asia to de-weed, and also chickens utilized in portions of Latin America to de-insect, right? So to get rid of all insects. Guinea fowl are especially great with smaller insects as well as the chickens. Larger insects, ducks and geese, excel at. But yeah, start to think of those different ways, because a farmer's natural inclination nowadays is to reach for the bottle, and I'm not talking about the tequila bottle, I'm talking about the bullshit Roundup bottle, or the bullshit, whatever major chemical you want to fucking name, Paraquat, DDT, any of those bullshit, pesticide, insecticide, herbicides. That's their first solution that they reach to, and it's very American way of thinking, and that's kind of why our medicine is the way it is, right? Like, we're a reactionary society instead of a preventionary society. And that effect, that carries over into our farming, right? Instead of creating a healthy ecosystem, a healthy farm that can withstand disease pressures and insect pressures, we like to reach for the bottle whenever we see those pressures and treat the symptom, not the fucking, the actual disease. So, this is something that American agriculture really needs to get over. Unfortunately, I believe to prosper in this 21st century, different climate, agricultural world. So, but tale for another day. I just want you to know that cactus itself, right, can serve the use of a trap plant, but never forget about the cactus itself being affected by lots of these different plagues and stuff. And on agaverocaliforniano.com, we are listing the agave and cactus that we sell and stuff, and have information and data about. And we try to put on there, for instance, the susceptibility, either high resistance or low resistance or medium resistance to everything from aphids, cochineal, mites, jackrabbits, deer, pigs, hogs, just any wildlife pressure that we've seen on agave or cactus farms. We list it there, and the different observations we've had over these cacti or agave. And Opuntia Phaeacantha has had, for instance, a medium to high resistance to cochineal. So the lowest resistance in cochineal that I've seen are from a highly monoculturalized Opuntia species from Mexico, which makes sense because, nature's going to figure out a way to kill something that's really abundant like that, right? But especially if it doesn't like this system, right? But native Opuntia Phaeacantha has shown cochineal resistance in my case. I'll literally have it in greenhouses right next to Opuntia cochinealifera, full of fucking cochineal, and Opuntia Phaeacantha does not get it. And if you know anything about cochineal, you know that it spreads by wind and easily can transfer over to another plant literally within a day or an hour. And that is something I'm also seeing with Opuntia littoralis, a medium resistance. Now, to, for instance, the jackrabbit, deer, and pig or hog resistance will be generally low to medium. This is, in contrast to Opuntia littoralis, which has been put up against a lot of these different animals, and for some reason they're not attracted to them as other species of cacti. And that may be observation bias, where just what we're seeing is showing, because there are several species of cacti planted on these farms we're observing on, that the pigs just aren't attacking this species because maybe another species is higher in sugar or fiber content or nutrient content, and they just prioritize that species. But either way, this is something that's stuck out to us with littoralis, right? But Phaeacantha doesn't follow those rules. It's like most cacti, going to be susceptible to the large predators. The one that it is got a medium to high resistance for is the rodent population. So rats, ground squirrels, gophers, those types of small animals or small critters that may be affecting agave and cactus in high numbers. Phaeacantha has shown a resistance, and they pretty much avoid this. Now, they will avoid the plant and will come for the fruit as soon as it's ripe. And I kind of think that's, they love this Opuntia Phaeacantha purple prickly pear really highly, so they're content in allowing it to grow so that they may eat the seeds, right? It kind of reminds me of Opuntia bacillaris, subspecies bacillaris here, right? Because with the amount of jackrabbits we have here, and coyotes and squirrels, you would think that none of them could literally exist in this area, but once again, the rodent population is allowing the Opuntia Phaeacantha to grow and spreading it by seed, and now there's more and more food for themselves. So I don't know if that's like nature's plan or if that's like just the rodent population's like natural scheme of things, but we're seeing that. So the rodents are affecting Opuntia Phaeacantha far less than other Opuntia. Now this may also be due to the fact that we're dry farming it in most of the farms that I'm working on, or consulting on, or sold plants to. And because they are holding a lower amount of water in their, say, pads, maybe they're not as attractive as other Mexican Opuntia varieties, which seem to be very low resistance to a lot of those rodent populations because they have lower spines. They've been cultivated for that, and they're really full of water. Like they hold water really well. Maybe that's due to some of the natural irrigation that's done on cacti farms, right? They learned over time to hold more water, or maybe they did that naturally. Either way, they have more water, and the plants or the fucking rodents are going for those. Versus dry farm California native species such as Opuntia littoralis and Phaeacantha, they are really avoiding compared to some of those Mexican cultivars, which they love, right? Now, cochineal, for example, has been dealt with mostly through chemicals in Mexico. In centuries past, it was harvested, and that's definitely our approach. We don't hate this plague. We actually love when we see it because that means we're going to make an extra little bit of money off the cochineal or have some more cochineal that we can utilize in our products, right? For instance, we just made this bomb salve out of creosote, laurea, tridentata, and ambrosia dumosa, which is white fir sage, and it's an amazing salve. I would love to turn it red with some cochineal or purple, and that's something that we're going to be able to do with harvesting cochineal, right? But getting to the point that the cochineal is mostly dealt with chemically in Mexico. So if you try to grow monoculture or Mexican Opuntia varieties, such as Opuntia ficus indica, that have been heavily industrialized and put into monoculture systems, and they're dealing with this plague mostly through chemical applications, then when you're not doing the same system, so say you buy plants from a farm like that, and you're like, well, I'm going to do the complete opposite. I'm going to be regenerative. I'm going to grow my shit sustainable, blah, blah, blah. All right, great. Well, you're off to a bad start there, man, because these plants already were accustomed over generations to grow with these fucking chemicals being applied all the time, with the tillage being applied all the time, with certain labor being applied all the time, right? You put it into a California system like mine, that's a dry farm, that's, low labor, you're going to run into the issue that this cochineal is not going to be able to get rid of because it has, how do I explain this? So, I guess a huge misconception with chemical application of stuff for cochineal is that it gets rid of the cochineal. That is not the case. It may drop the cochineal to less than 1% or something that is visible at the eye level or at the farmer level, you say, but it is always there and it is always coming back. And it is something that, like the HLB I described before, a part of cactus, man. Like, these insects are not in existence for fucking nothing, dude. Like, they exist for a reason to get rid of weak plants, plants that are dying, plants that are unhealthy, plants that do not fit in the ecosystem and nature wants to get rid of and maybe innovate. And many of the times, unfortunately, our monoculture, high-till, high-chemical systems fit the exact description of shit that nature wants to get rid of. So, these insect infestations will never, ever be removed. Ever. I can guarantee that. But the point that I'm trying to make here, when you're bringing a plant from a heavy chemical system like that, and you're trying to grow it without any chemicals, without any tillage, it's going to be very difficult to maintain that plant without the cochineal or the insect or whatever, right? And that's due to that plant being, as I mentioned, for generations raised that way, right? We've lost the genetics of our ancestors, many places that are cultivating Opuntia in Mexico, and we no longer have these extremely strong genetically or genetic cactus or cactus genetics that were bred by the indigenous over lots of, thousands of years to be something that was able to be dry farmed, to not use chemicals, to not use tillage, to be in a polyculture. They got rid of that when for the past 100 years we've been growing cactus in this bullshit system. So the cactus is a quick evolver, and it's been seeded and cultivated the heck out of in Mexico. And now these issues are persistent in places like California or North Africa. Because I give the example of North Africa. North Africa imported a lot of cactus, in past centuries. And when their cactus industry developed, most of the initial clones were coming from Mexican cactus that was brought over, by Europeans. And this cactus naturally had cochineal as well. Now, the difference between the Mexicans and the Africans here is that the Africans do not have quite as ready accessibility to chemical applications, either because they may not have the applicators, they may not have the financial credit to be able to buy them or buy the chemicals, or like one thing people don't understand about a lot of agriculture in America, it's all run on debt. Farmers go to the bank, they get millions of dollars from the bank based off of their land value, right? And then the bank gives them money to essentially function for the next year. And the bank is betting that they're going to have a good year, right? And a lot of ag loans are pretty much like that. Now, what does that mean for a country or a region like Africa that doesn't have as easy access to capital or credit? They can't apply these things like, the chemicals, or they can't have a lot of the tractors that may hold the sprayers, because small farmers, medium farmers, even large farmers do not have easy accessible credit. While I fucking hate credit, I mostly buy everything in cash, and I really dislike debt. Debt is extremely important for agriculture globally, and unfortunately, Africans don't have access to it, so as much as Mexicans. And the Mexicans, that's why they can apply so much chemicals, but the point I'm trying to make here is that the Africans, North Africans that are growing Opuntia, don't have the same ability to fight this disease as the Mexicans. And that's why they're losing large amounts of their Opuntia that they are cultivating. This is not happening in Mexico. In Mexico, we have a bottom of a price in Opuntia because we are, there's just so much of it. They're cultivating it to heck. And now the price of Opuntia in North Africa is going up because of the cochineal potentially being responsible for, in the next few years, getting rid of hundreds of thousands of acres. More acreage of Opuntia is planted in Africa than Mexico. You get me? So, yeah, this is a crucial thing to realize, right? Because your sourcing of your plants, I've said forever, is one of the most important things. If you're sourcing from someone like me that's cold, got cold hardy, bred into the agave or cactus, drought tolerant, low maintenance, always consistently improving genetics, that is something that you want to buy. I'm not trying to be biased here, but I would never purchase an agave from Mexico just for the fact that by crossing the border, it will be chemically sprayed for fungicides and pesticides, and I'm going to be receiving a basically chemically treated agave to begin my farm with, or cactus in this case. And once again, I would not purchase those plants because I'm not going to be in a system like that. Now, the opposite is also true. If you're a large-scale farmer that is going to be tilling and spraying and having lots of, low-wage labor Mexicans on your farm maintaining these cactus or agave for you, then fucking go for it. Import all the Mexican agave and cactus you want, because you're going to be having the same shitty system, and you want the same shitty plants for your same shitty system. But for the majority of the people that are listening to this podcast, I know that's not us. So we're not going to be able to have those liberties. And we need to seek sourcing of these plants from areas that are prioritizing our management styles. You know, that's really crucial. Now, I know people don't really think that's important, like where you source your plants, but it's highly, highly important. You know, same thing, a Mexican agave or cactus coming from a region that they get 30 inches of rain where it never drops under 45 Fahrenheit throughout the whole year, and you're trying to plant this shit in Arizona or Texas or fucking Montana, don't waste your money. The plants are gonna fucking die. I'll tell you right now, I don't give a fuck what that plant seller or nursery told you, okay? You need to be buying plants that are gonna be hardy for your fucking region, okay? And a lot of this shit being imported from Mexico will never be able to leave the coast. and people think I'm like just trying to be biased or a fucking hater here. Yeah, okay, maybe it sounds like that to you, but I've had clients of mine spend over $100,000 with some of these so-called agave experts in California for all of their fucking agave to die in another state. You know, I don't know what the fuck is wrong with some of these growers in California. They believe that it's ethical to sell plants to people that they know for sure will not live there. That's extremely unethical in my opinion. And honestly, I wish I could just out them. I don't know if I could. You know what I mean? But, you know, make sure you get your plants from a correct source, right? And a lot of these fucking large industrial monoculturalists that are importing heavily agave into America, they're not where you want to get your agave from. That agave is weak genetically. The best agave in Mexico is going into spirits and products such as silage and biofuels and stuff like that, and has already been accounted for. The shit that they're trying to ship to us for pennies on the dollar is not their best quality. Okay? Nobody exports their fucking best quality. Like, what the fuck? You know? That's at least not for planting, right? I give the example, Mexico with tomatoes. You go to a store in Mexico, tomatoes are fucking third world bullshit. I don't even know, like, you know, most of the top grade A1 shit goes to America. But not the fucking plants. Hell no. The plants, fuck no. You will never see some Mexican selling their breeded tomatoes to an American. Why? Because then their export market would fucking cease to exist. Okay? But the point I'm making there is that usually farmers are very wise to keep their genetics for their region, and they know that if they send plants somewhere else, they are going to become competition. So I will never send my best plants. Now that's not necessarily something we follow here. We try to send a lot of our best plants to other people, but we're always growing more. So we're always innovating and creating new best plants. So when you're a stagnant farmer that has the same genetics for 30, 40 years, you can't have that liberty because they may take your ass out, you know? Wow, this podcast has been going on for a long time. I didn't even realize this shit right now. I mean, you know, Opuntia Phaeacantha, if you've learned anything today, can be a plant that takes over, begins, and develops the cactus and prickly pear industry in America. And, you know, this is a nation that heavily invests in biofuels. We have billions, with a billions of subsidies going to ethanol production from corn that, you know, people have complained forever that it is a very stupid thing to do because none of those farmers would be profitable if it wasn't for those subsidies, and none of that ethanol would be used if it wasn't for fucking government programs that prioritize the use of that ethanol. So it seems like it was forced on the market, it was forced on farmers, right? Well, here's, you know, I'll throw this one at you. I made a video one time, maybe a year or two ago, and I talked about, you know, I think the video was something like big corn seeing agave farmers creating biofuels without any subsidies about to take them out. Dude, the amount of comments I got from corn farmers saying, fuck you, stay in your lane, like, you know, you'll never get rid of corn, like all this bullshit. I was laughing so hard because I'm like, I don't need the government I don't need none of that shit. And I can produce it far more sustainably than you for a far cheaper price. And I know because I've done it already. So, you know, if a small-scale production of biomethane, bioethanol by me can be seen as more efficient than these large-scale farmers in Nebraska and Iowa producing bioethanol, woo! Wait until I get an investor, or wait until I get some more money and fucking create my own biorefinery. I'm going to take you guys out without $1 from the government. And I can't wait to do it because I've said forever I'm much more invested, and I believe there's a much higher opportunity in energy than there will be in spirits ever globally. And, you know, if we are spending billions in subsidies on an inefficient energy source, the day the government is non-biased and able to see I'm producing it without subsidies for far cheaper for the consumer, which means that bioethanol now could actually be incorporated into more places in the energy grid, the government will give up on big corn. And, you know, maybe we got to lobby like these big corn people. But the point is, big corn is scared. They're scared because they know what agave could do. And they know what cactus could do. And go out there and take that fucking market from them. Because bioethanol produced from American corn is one of the worst fucking industries in this world. And agave could utilize far less water, far less land, far less resources, and produce far more energy, far cheaper for people. And the best part is you can do it in systems that aren't expensive. So this corn has to be grown, for instance, in some of the best agricultural land in the world. Whereas my agave and my cactus, you could put my ass in any fucking desert in this world and I'll make sure that that shit fucking produces. So good luck with that, corn producers, because I have more land, or us agave and cactus farmers have more land than you will ever be able to amass. And we're going to beat you at your own game there. But that's just to tell you guys that, you know, Opuntia Phaeacantha has so many uses, you know, and I cannot wait to see a large-scale development of bioethanol made from Opuntia Phaeacantha or in agave americana, you know, these USA native varieties of agave cactus, which is coming very, very soon. But, you know, I guess the main point of this podcast is to just show you that Opuntia Phaeacantha has the potential to be one of the first cactus species that proliferates the cactus industry through the United States. And it's really good all over the plant, on water, on maintenance, on all of these things. And it's a strong candidate, right, to jumpstart the industry. And I'm you know, happy to be able to offer hundreds or thousands of pads to people that want to farm it and cultivate it. But you know, that wasn't the point of this podcast. You know, I really wanted to just show you today, talk to you today about a mentality, right? It's like, this podcast could have been 5 minutes long. You could have just Googled it in 30 seconds and found out all the dimensions of this plant. What I want to describe to you is a mentality on these podcasts. You have to start thinking like a businessman, like an entrepreneur, so that you can utilize your agave and cactus can revolutionize the world. And, you know, I've said forever that cactus, much like agave, will be global very soon. Any place that can grow it will grow it. And I give the example. I envision, you know, one day I could have a small biorefinery here and directly burn cactus and agave, or create biomethane and package it and ship it around the U.S., or bioethanol and do similar. Or the point being, I can see where a small agave farm could be supplying energy to its community and being profitable doing it, capturing carbon at the same time, making lots of diverse food products at the same time as creating that energy. Opuntia Phaeacantha can serve so many different uses for our community. And we're definitely going to explore that here, right? Like, we want to create lots of different products from it for people. But I think the biggest of them all, I keep saying it, is going to be energy. And, a little tired. But Opuntia Phaeacantha is an amazing cactus. And I hope you give it a chance to cultivate it. If you want to cultivate it, you can always hit me up and stuff. But, yeah, it's just something I wanted to put on your radar. The amount of people that talk to me about prickly pears and don't even know what Opuntia Phaeacantha is or Opuntia littoralis is insane in California. These are our native prickly pears here. Opuntia Phaeacantha is native to the Mojave Desert, littoralis to Southern California, coastal areas, and mountains. And these are some of the strongest species of Opuntia that I have on my farm, and people in California need to know about them. We're trying to jumpstart a cactus industry here in the U.S. and in California with Mexican stuff, when at the end of the day, the American stuff may be a better bet for us. More resistant to stuff, more drought tolerant, more cold hardy, more faster growing in many cases, more manageable for harvest, right? I explained earlier how many of them are ground covers that don't get over 5-6 feet tall, the ideal range for harvesting. So, hopefully you learned something today about Opuntia Phaeacantha. I don't know how long my Opuntia littoralis fucking podcast was, but this probably definitely beats it. I feel like we're like almost at 3 hours or some shit now. But, I don't make these podcasts for people that are trying to get in quick and leave real quick with, one little piece of knowledge. I want you to be educated. I want you to fucking be so knowledgeable about your plant that you could fucking write a book about it if somebody chained your ass up in a room. You get me? Like, you have to know this shit so well, because there's so many factors that affect your business and farm. And the more comfortable you get, the less probability you're going to be successful. Put it that way. But, yeah, anyways, have a great rest of the day. Hope, I haven't put out a podcast in a while, but, hopefully you guys got something to listen to for a bit for the next few days while I get the recordings online for the other one. And because I think I've recorded like 7 or 8 podcasts. I've just been so busy that I haven't released any in like a month. And my bad, I'm still keeping to that rule that I made at the beginning of the year, which I'd like to have 1 podcast per week for a total of like, say, 55 or something, and through March, we kept up with that. April, we haven't put any out, so I owe you guys 4, but now it's almost May. So, you know what? This week, I'm going to try to put out, at least 3 to 5 podcasts to try to catch back up. Which shouldn't be too hard, because like I said, I got them recorded already. What I need to do is just sit down one of these chances I get and, upload them. But, yeah, hopefully through this podcast, you can learn, a lot about how to think about your agave cactus. A lot of people, this is, I went to university, but like, a lot of people that go to university think the only way to do stuff is by the book. And us historians know to question who wrote the book, why they wrote the book, when they wrote the book. But you have to make sure that, you're not only approaching stuff in one way, and this podcast, if it teaches you any way or anything, it's that an ADHD mind like me can go on a fucking 1,000 tangents and think of 1,000 ways of creating something out of my cactus 1,000 ways that my cactus will be affected macroeconomically, politically, socially, and those all affect every day how I'm managing this farm. And over time, you know, I think I've said this in the past podcast again, you know, it's like I may learn more and more and more and more, and I feel like I know less. So, yeah, you know somebody who thinks they know it all in cactus or agave, they definitely don't. They're definitely dumbasses for believing that, because every day I learn some shit about agave and cactus, and every day I'm advancing my knowledge, my breeding, my plant genetics, and every day I seek improvement, and you should too as a farmer. You know, I say it a lot, but if you stay stagnant as a farmer, this shit's ending with you, man, because your grandpa, your dad, your fucking great-grandpa, your ancestors, they didn't fucking stay stagnant. They innovated, they developed, and they, yes, maintained tradition, but they were always, you know, improving. And the worst thing a farmer could do is stay stagnant, believe they know it all, and not seek help or not believe they need help. Everybody needs fucking help. I need help. Everybody needs help. You know, I consult for a lot of people, but it's like people think I'm like this fucking expert, and I'm like, I hate that word almost now, because I feel like more and more people are calling me an agave expert the more I put myself out there. But I don't see it that way. I see myself as a agave learner, a cactus learner, a person that seeks to learn as much as they can about this subject while being conscious that I will never learn it all, you know. But the more I do know, the better decisions I can make. And this is kind of, you know, this big data push that's going on now, right? Like, where the more data you have, the better decisions you can make. Fucking hilarious. Every time I'm trying to end this podcast, I get like a call or some shit. But anyways, have a great rest of the day, y'all. Hope you learned some shit. Agave and Cactus Talk out.